So we can now see the content of our header component on the screen, but of course it doesn't really look the way I want it to look yet. And we can change this by adding some styles, which is typically done by adding a new file, a header.component.css file in this case, again using that same naming pattern, and by then linking to that style file inside of the header component TypeScript file, by setting up the style URL configuration property here, which, just like template URL, wants a relative path to that style file. So in this case, to header.component.css. By the way, there also is a style URLs property you can set, which would take an array of multiple external style files that should be considered. And there also is just a styles property, which you could also set, which wants an array of inline styles where you define the CSS styles right inside of this TypeScript file, so that you could set up your CSS rules like this right inside of this file. That would work, but just as with inline templates, it's actually a discouraged pattern, and the most common way of linking to external files is therefore with style URLs, or if it's just a single file, with style URL, like this. Now, since this is not a CSS course, we won't write the style code together though, but instead attached you find a link to a header component.css file, which I prepared in advance, which you can simply copy into your project. Or you can copy the styles defined in that file into your header component CSS file. And attached you actually also find some other assets and files. For example, a task management logo PNG file, which you should copy and paste into your assets folder, because we'll soon use this image in our header markup. And you also find an updated styles.css file, which you should use to replace your styles.css file, which you find directly in the SRC folder. This style file sets up some global styles that will apply to all components, whereas the component-specific style files set up styles that apply only to the components they belong to, so they can't clash with styles of other components. We also need some global styles though, and that's why you find an updated styles.css file attached, and you can simply replace yours with the attached one. Now, this attached file also uses some special fonts, which we can import from Google Fonts, and therefore you should also go to the index.html file, and you should replace this file with the index.html file you find attached to simply add those extra links here which import fonts from Google Fonts. That's the only change I made with that index.html file. Well, and with all that done, we now improved the styling, and therefore, as a last step, you should go to the header component HTML file to also update the markup. Because in there, I now also want to output an image, which we can do with the default image element, and set the source to assets/task-management-logo.png. So to that file you find attached to this lecture, this task management logo PNG file. It's in the assets folder, so that's also the path we set up here. And Angular will then make sure that it gets loaded onto the page correctly. We can also set up some alt text here, like a to-do list, because that is what can be seen on that image. Now, when loading an image from the assets file like we're doing it here, there is one important thing you should check, and that's in that Angular JSON file in your root project folder. In there, you should make sure that you have this assets configuration, which should be an array, and that there you have this src/assets entry. If it instead looks something like this, where you don't have that assets entry, but where instead you might have a configuration object like this, you should make sure that you simply add that src/assets string to that array, just like this. Otherwise, the image can't be loaded. You should also make sure that you add this path to the fav icon here so that you see that as well. If you're using the started project I provided at the beginning of this section, that will already be the case though, and you don't need to make any changes to that Angular JSON file. And then for styling purposes, I want to wrap this h1 element into a div element and add a paragraph where I'll say enterprise level task management without friction. Of course, you can use any text you want. And with all these changes made, with that development server up and running, they will be picked up automatically, and you should now see this header on the screen if you reload the application. And that's therefore a huge step forward, because that's now our finished first custom component, the header component.